Aura Vance was supposed to be choosing the lace for her wedding dress. Instead, she was riding for her life, the fine red dust of Arizona coating the back of her throat. Her world had been a map of straight lines, from her bed to the kitchen, from her uncle's house to the church, and from the church straight into the arms of a man she despised, a wealthy man, a powerful man, a man who looked at her like she was a horse he was about to buy. His name was Bartholomew Kane, and in 1 week he was set to own her, body and soul. The pressure in her chest had been building for days, a physical weight she couldn't breathe past. That afternoon, Kane had given her a gift, a heavy silver locket. When he fastened it around her neck, his fingers felt like ice, like the touch of a dead thing. "Soon," he'd murmured, his breath sour with expensive cigars. "All of you will belong to me." That word, belong, was the spark that lit the fuse. So she ran. She slipped out into the skeletal moonlight, swung onto her horse Flicker's bare back, and rode. She wasn't riding to anywhere specific. She was just riding away. Away from the straight lines, away from the cold locket on her chest, away from the man who saw her as a beautiful vessel. She rode until the lights of the town called Redemption were just a bitter memory, swallowed by the dark. She was chasing a freedom she'd only read about in forbidden books, a ghost of a feeling in a life that had none. She had no idea she was riding directly toward a man who lay bleeding his life into the sand. A man who would change everything she thought she knew about love, about hate, and about the terrible secrets the desert kept buried. The sun was a hammer by mid-morning. Aura had let Flicker wander for hours, deeper into a land she'd only seen from a distance. The panic had burned itself out, leaving only a hollow exhaustion. She knew she couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, her uncle, the Reverend Silas Vance, would send men. Sooner or later, Bartholomew Kane would come to collect his property. She was following a dry creek bed when she saw it. A splash of color that didn't belong, not the pale greens and dusty browns of the desert. It was a patch of dark crimson, stark and wet against the sand. A feeling she hadn't been allowed to nurture. Curiosity pulled her forward. She slid off Flicker's back and crept closer. It was a man, and he was Apache. There was no mistaking the high cheekbones, the long black hair matted with blood, the simple leather clothing. He was sprawled among the rocks, one leg twisted at an angle that made her stomach clench. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across his side. Her first thought was a jolt of pure, brain-screaming fear. Fear her uncle had carefully planted in her since she was a child. Savages, heathens, demons in human skin. The name Geronimo was a curse whispered in her town. She should run, get on her horse and ride until her heart exploded. She took a step back, her bare feet sinking into the hot sand. But then the man groaned. It wasn't a sound of menace. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. It cut through a decade of her uncle's sermons. In that one sound, he wasn't a demon. He was just a man, broken and bleeding under the same relentless sun. And the buzzards were already circling, patient black specks against an indifferent blue sky. Something inside her broke. A quiet, final rebellion. Leaving him here to die felt like a sin far greater than anything her uncle had ever preached about. Leaving him here would be surrendering to the cold, calculating world of Bartholomew Kane. Saving him, that would be an act that was entirely her own, the first real choice she had ever made. With trembling hands, she knelt beside him. She ripped a long strip from the hem of her cotton nightgown and pressed it to the wound in his side. His eyelids fluttered. For a terrifying second, his eyes opened. They were dark, bottomless, and filled not with hate, but with a dazed, weary confusion. Then they rolled back into his head, and he was gone again. She had to get him on the horse. He was a dead weight of muscle and bone. She strained, grunting, half lifting, half dragging, until she heaved his torso over Flicker's back. She couldn't take him back to redemption. That was a death sentence for them both. But she remembered a place, an old, forgotten line shack in a hidden canyon, miles from anywhere. It would have to do. Leading the horse, she began the slow, terrified journey, the silver locket from Cain swinging against her chest with every step, a cold, metallic reminder of the world she was betraying. But for the first time in her life, Aura Vance felt like she was walking towards something, not just running away. The line shack was barely standing, but it was hidden, and a small trickle of water seeped from the rocks nearby. It was a sanctuary built of rot and shadow. Ara eased the unconscious man onto a dusty, moth-eaten cot. The movement tore a raw cry from his lips before he sank back into darkness. For the next 3 days, her life split in two. By day, she was the meek, obedient niece, her distracted air earning sharp looks from Reverend Silas. Her mind, however, was miles away in that canyon. She became a thief in her own home. She stole jerky, a small bag of beans, a bottle of her uncle's whiskey. She took her father's old hunting knife from a trunk that hadn't been opened in years. She faked a terrible headache to get a small bottle of laudanum from the town doctor, her hands shaking as she paid the coin. Every evening, as twilight bled across the sky, she would ride. The wound in his side was festering. The flesh was an angry, swollen red. Gritting her teeth, she used the whiskey to clean it. The man thrashed, his fevered eyes seeing nightmares she couldn't imagine. Then she took the knife, heating the blade in the flame of a small fire until it glowed. Her stomach churned, but she forced her hand to be steady. She had to probe the wound. She had to find what was killing him. Deeper and deeper she pushed until she felt the knife scrape against something hard. A flattened piece of lead, a bullet. With a final sickening pull, she worked it free. The man screamed, a raw, animal sound that filled the tiny shack and seemed to shake the very logs. Then, mercifully, he passed out. She packed the wound with a poultice of crushed sage leaves, a trick she'd learned from an old Mexican woman years ago. She dribbled water between his cracked lips and sat with him through the long, fever-racked nights. She listened to his delirious mutterings in a language that was just sound to her. She learned the rhythms of his pain. On the 4th night, the fever broke. She was dozing in a rickety chair, and a strange feeling washed over her. The feeling of being watched. She looked up. He was awake. Truly awake. His dark eyes were clear, intelligent, and filled with a deep, bottomless weariness. He watched her every move, his hand resting near the hilt of a knife she hadn't noticed tucked into his belt. The silence stretched between them, thick with 100 years of hate and mistrust. "Water," he finally rasped. She brought it. He drank greedily. They started to communicate in broken pieces. He knew some English words, hard, practical words: soldier, rider, gun. She learned his name was Kale. He learned hers was Ara. He pointed to his ruined leg, a clean break. Using charcoal on a piece of wood, she drew a picture of a splint. He understood. Together they set the bone. The pain must have been blinding, but he made no sound. His jaw was clenched so tight she thought it would break. In the quiet hours of that shack, the walls between their worlds began to crumble. She told him about her uncle's cold house, about the town of redemption. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his eyes seeming to understand more than her simple words could say. He, in turn, told her of his world, of the Chiricahua Mountains, which he spoke of like living beings, of his people, the free folk, being squeezed onto reservations where their souls starved. He told her about his wife, Lena. He said she was gone, stolen from him during a raid on their camp by white men. Prospectors, he called them, men with gold fever in their eyes. He spoke her name with a reverence that made Ara's throat ache. This man, this savage, had known a love so deep its absence was a physical presence in the room, a ghost that sat beside them. One evening, he told her how he'd been injured. He was tracking a group of men who worked for a powerful rancher. These men were selling whiskey to the young, desperate warriors on the reservation, poisoning his people from the inside for profit. He was ambushed, shot, and left for the coyotes. He described the leader, a man in a fine coat who sat on a powerful black stallion, a man who gave the order to shoot him. As Cale described the man's cold, pale eyes and the smug set of his jaw, a knot of pure ice formed in Ara's stomach. Her hand went to her throat, her fingers finding the heavy silver locket. "This man," she asked, her voice a trembling whisper, "did he have a large ranch by the river?" Cale's eyes narrowed. He nodded slowly. "The Bar C, they call it." The world tilted on its axis. The man who had ordered Cale's death, the man poisoning his people for profit, and the man she was supposed to marry were one and the same. Bartholomew Kane. The cage she was running from wasn't just gilded with piety. It was built on a foundation of blood and lies. And the truth of it was more terrifying than any future she had ever imagined. The revelation changed everything. The shack was no longer a sanctuary. It was the epicenter of a war, and she was standing on the fault line. Every time she looked at Cale, she saw the living, breathing proof of Bartholomew Kane's evil. Her complicity in that world, her impending marriage, felt like a disease spreading through her soul. Her trips to the shack became missions of pure terror. Kane was growing impatient. He started visiting the house more often, his presence sucking the oxygen from every room. He'd talk about their future, the children she would give him, the sons who would carry the Kane name. He'd trail his fingers along her arm, and she would have to fight the urge to scream. The image of Cale's fevered, pain-racked body would flash in her mind. "You seem distant, my dear," Kane remarked one evening, his pale eyes narrowing with suspicion. "A Kane woman must be strong." Her uncle sensed it too. "There is a darkness in your spirit, Ara," Silas accused, his voice like the crack of a whip. "This union is your salvation. Do not test the Lord's patience, or mine." The walls were closing in. The weight of her secret was crushing her. One night she fled to the shack in a state of near collapse. A storm was brewing on the horizon, the air thick with electricity. She found Cale outside, leaning on a makeshift crutch. He was staring at the darkening mesas, his profile like something carved from the rock itself. She stumbled toward him, the dam of her composure finally breaking. A sob, raw and ugly, tore from her throat. Then another, and another, until she was on her knees in the dust, her body shaking with the force of her despair. Cale turned, his expression softening from stoicism to a deep, quiet concern. He said nothing. He just stood there, a steady presence in her storm. "He will own me," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "My uncle, this town, him, they've built a cage for me my entire life, and I just walked into it." She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. "I'm supposed to feel blessed. I'm supposed to be grateful, but I feel nothing. Nothing at all." The most vulnerable truth of her existence spilled from her in a broken whisper. "I have never known love." The world fell silent. The approaching storm seemed to hold its breath. Cale looked down at her, and in his dark eyes she saw not pity, but a reflection of her own pain. He had lost the great love of his life. She had never been allowed to find one. They were two sides of the same desolate coin. He lowered himself carefully, painfully to the ground in front of her. He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand palm up in the space between them. An offering, not a demand. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, a bedrock in her swirling sea of chaos. "Then I will give you all of mine," he said. The words were not a proposal, not a promise of an easy future. They were a vow, a transference. He was offering her the entirety of what he had left, the love he carried for his lost wife, for his people, for his land. A love that was fierce and protective and forged in unimaginable loss. A love that had survived fire. In that moment, something broke open inside her. It wasn't the giddy flutter of romance she'd read about. It was something far more powerful. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the very first time. She slowly placed her trembling hand in his. His skin was warm and calloused, a world away from Kane's smooth, cold touch. As their fingers intertwined, the first drop of rain fell from the sky, landing like a tear on their joined hands. The storm had finally broken, and so had the world as Ara knew it. That vow changed the air in the shack. It was more real, more binding than any promise spoken in her uncle's church. They were no longer just a patient and a rescuer. They were allies, partners against a world that wanted them both erased. Kale began to teach her, not just words in his language, but how to read the land itself. He showed her which plants could heal, which could kill, how to find water by watching the flight of a bird, how to move without leaving a trace. He was giving her the tools of survival, the tools of his world. In return, she would read to him from her hidden books. He would listen, his gaze unwavering, seeing the hunger for freedom in her that he knew so well in himself. But their fragile peace couldn't last. The outside world was a relentless tide, and it was seeping through the cracks of their sanctuary. The first warning came from an old ranch hand named Jebediah. Jeb was a man who looked as old as the hills, with a face like a dried apple and hands gnarled from a lifetime of hard work. He rarely spoke, but he saw everything. He'd seen the light in Ara's eyes dim over the years. He'd noticed her nightly rides, the missing food. One evening, he cornered her by the corral. "Be careful, little bird," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Kane ain't the kind of man who likes his property to wander." He pressed a small, heavy box of cartridges into her hand. "Your pa's old Colt is still in his trunk. Might be time to remember how to use it." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her stunned by his silent, dangerous act of loyalty. She took the gun that night. A heavy Colt Peacemaker. It felt cold and powerful in her hand. The net truly began to tighten a few days later. Her uncle Silas, driven by a paranoid suspicion, searched her room. He found the loose floorboard. But it wasn't the books that damned her. Tucked inside one was a small, perfect eagle feather, a token of thanks Kale had given her. To Silas, it was the brand of the devil. An Apache trinket, a sign of the ultimate betrayal. His mind, already rigid with scripture, twisted the pieces together. The secret rides, the stolen supplies, the feather. She was consorting with the enemy, a sin of the flesh and the spirit. But Silas was a cunning man. He didn't confront her. He went straight to Bartholomew Kane. Kane listened to the Reverend's sputtering, horrified story with a chilling stillness. His friendly mask dropped away, revealing the predator beneath. He wasn't just angry. He was insulted. His property was being befouled. His authority challenged. The Apache scout his men had failed to kill was not only alive, but being harbored by his intended bride. "I have men searching for that renegade," Kane said, his voice deceptively calm, a cold fire in his eyes. "It seems their search area was too broad. We will narrow it." He turned to his foreman, a ruthless man named Cully. "Take a dozen men," Kane commanded. "The Reverend's niece has a habit of riding out toward the old mesas. Scour every canyon, every shack. I want him dragged back here in chains." He paused, his eyes gleaming with a cold, possessive light. "And I want her brought back untouched. She will be my wife, and she will learn the meaning of obedience." The hunt began. From the shack they could see them in the distance, riders fanning out across the landscape. Methodical, relentless. Kyle saw them first. His senses were a razor's edge. "They know," he said, his voice flat. He looked at his splinted leg, a bitter frustration in his eyes. He was strong, but he couldn't outrun a dozen mounted men. Panic seized Ara. "What do we do?" Kyle's gaze met hers, steady and clear. "You must go back. Tell them you were lost. This is not your fight." "No." The word came out with a force that surprised them both. The girl who had trembled before her uncle was gone. "You said you would give me all of your love," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You didn't say it would be easy. This is our fight now." She took the box of cartridges from her pocket and pulled her father's Colt from her saddlebag. The metal was cool and heavy in her hand. Jebediah's warning, Silas's betrayal, Cain's possessive rage. It all solidified into a single terrifying truth. The time for hiding was over. The net had closed, and they were trapped inside. The posse moved like a closing fist. Cully, Cain's foreman, was a brutal but effective tracker. He found Flicker's tracks, fresh and clear, leading directly toward the hidden canyon. By late afternoon, the line shack was surrounded. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. Yara stood by the single grimy window, her father's Colt feeling alien in her grip. Cale was beside her, armed with his knife and a heavy branch he'd fashioned into a club. His face was a mask of concentration. "When they come," he said in a low voice, "stay behind me. Do not let them take you alive, Ara. Cain will make your life a different kind of death." The grim instruction landed with the weight of absolute truth. The first voice that called out was not Cain's. It was the righteous, booming cry of her uncle. "Ara, child, come out from that den of sin, renounce the heathen, and return to the fold." "He lies," Cale murmured without taking his eyes off the riders. "His god is Cain." "I know," she whispered, her knuckles white on the grip of the pistol. Then came the second voice, smooth, arrogant, laced with menace. Bartholomew Cain himself had ridden out. He sat astride his black stallion on the ridge overlooking the canyon, a king surveying his domain. "Ara, my dear, this foolishness has gone on long enough. Bring out the savage. You will not be harmed. We have a wedding to plan." His voice dripped with a confidence that made her blood run cold. She didn't answer. Her silence was her rebellion. Cully grew impatient. "Enough of this. Let's go get him." The assault began. 2 men charged the shack from the front, while others laid down covering fire. Splinters flew from the log walls as bullets tore through the decaying wood. Kyle shoved Ara to the floor, shielding her with his body. He rose, moving with a surprising speed, and flung the heavy door open just as one of the men reached it. He brought his club down with vicious force. The man crumpled. Ara, peering from the floor, saw the second man raise his rifle. She acted on pure instinct. She lifted the Colt, aimed, and fired. The recoil slammed her shoulder back, the explosion deafening in the small space. The man outside grunted, clutching his arm, and staggered away. A lull followed. 2 people in a wooden box against a dozen armed men. It couldn't last. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the standoff, the thunder of hoofbeats from an unexpected direction. Gunshots, not aimed at the shack, but at the posse. Jebediah. The old ranch hand had ridden up behind them, using a rocky outcrop for cover. He was firing his ancient Winchester, not with precision, but with the fury of a man making his final stand. The surprise attack threw Cain's men into confusion. Now, Kale yelled, grabbing Ara's arm. Out the back. Follow the creek bed. I'm not leaving you, she cried, a new and terrible fear gripping her. Jebediah has bought us a moment. Do not waste his gift. Kale shoved her toward a small opening in the back wall where the logs had rotted through. I will follow. Go! She scrambled through the opening, bursting out into the fading light. The gunfight was chaos behind her. She could hear Jebediah yelling a wild, defiant cry. She ran, stumbling over rocks, her lungs on fire. She looked back once. She saw Kale emerging from the shack, drawing the fire of several men, luring them away from her. From his perch on the ridge, Cain saw it all. He saw Jebediah's betrayal. He saw his prize escaping. His face was a thunderous mask of pure rage. He raised his own rifle, a beautiful long-barreled weapon, and took careful aim. Not at Ara, not at the injured Apache. He aimed at the old man who had dared to defy him. The shot rang out, sharp and final. Ara saw Jebediah clutch his chest, his rifle falling from his hands. He stood for a moment, silhouetted against the setting sun, then toppled from his horse. A scream of pure anguish ripped from Ara's throat. The kind, quiet man who had tried to protect her was dead. A sacrifice made for her. The horror of it propelled her forward, tears streaming down her face, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The fury of redemption had been unleashed. It had cost her the only friend she had, and it had branded her and Kale as fugitives. There was no going back now. There was only the vast, unforgiving wilderness ahead, and the long, vengeful shadow of Bartholomew Kane stretching out behind them. The world beyond the canyon was an ink-black void. The night was a blur of terror and grief, a desperate, stumbling flight fueled by adrenaline and the raw instinct to survive. Ara ran until her lungs were twin fires in her chest. The image of Jebediah falling against the dying sun was burned onto the inside of her eyelids. Every rasping breath she took felt like a betrayal of the last breath he had given for her. She finally collapsed in a thicket of thorny mesquite, her borrowed strength gone all at once. She curled into a ball, shaking, and waited. Waited for Kane's riders to burst through the brush, waited for the ground to swallow her whole. An hour passed, an eternity. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the night. Kale. He was limping heavily, his face a grim mask of exhaustion and pain. But he was alive. He knelt beside her. Without a word, she launched herself at him, her composure shattering completely. She wept with a raw, guttural grief she didn't know she possessed, a storm of all the horror, fear, and loss she had bottled up. Kale held her, his arms a circle of surprising strength. He didn't offer empty comforts. He simply held her, absorbing the tremors of her grief, letting her feel the full, terrible price of their freedom. He was a brave man, Kale said at last, his voice a low rumble. He chose his ground. He died an honorable death. He died for me, she whispered, the words choked with guilt. He died for what was right, Kale corrected, gently pulling back to look into her eyes. There is a difference. Men like Cain and your uncle they take. Men like Jebediah, they give. We will not let his gift be wasted. His words were harsh, but they were the words of a survivor. And so began their life on the run. They were two ghosts in the vastness of the territory, hunted by Bartholomew Kane's relentless fury. Kane had put a bounty on Kale's head, a bounty so large it turned every stranger into a potential enemy. The story spun in redemption, preached from Silas's pulpit, was of an innocent girl, bewitched by a heathen savage and dragged into the wilderness against her will. The desert, once the symbol of her loneliness, became their only sanctuary. The lessons Kale had started teaching her in the shack became their gospel of survival. The first days were brutal. He pushed them relentlessly, his injured leg a constant agony he refused to acknowledge. He taught her to walk on rock to leave no tracks, to use the sun and stars as her compass. She was a clumsy student. Her hands, soft from a life indoors, fumbled when trying to set one of his snares. "Patience," Kale said, his voice calm as he took her hands and guided her fingers through the motion. "The land does not hurry. You must learn its rhythm." Slowly she began to change. The soft girl who had flinched at blood learned to skin a rabbit with her father's knife. The young woman who had lived by a clock learned to tell time by the length of shadows. The world she had once seen as a monotonous expanse of brown and green revealed itself to be a complex tapestry of life and danger. As summer bled into autumn, they moved higher into the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains. The physical transformation in Ara was striking. Her skin was tanned and weathered, her body lean and strong. But the deeper change was within. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been honed into a sharp, vigilant awareness. The meek obedience was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. Kale, in turn, began to heal in ways that went beyond his mending leg. In teaching her, he found a new purpose. The crushing weight of his past, the grief for his wife Lena, began to lift. It didn't vanish, but it made room for something new. One cool evening, sitting by a small hidden fire, he spoke of Lena more than he ever had before. "I thought that when she died, the world of light died with her," he said, staring into the flames. "I thought my heart was a pouch of ashes, but you, Ara, you came with a spark. You fanned the embers." He looked at her, his dark eyes vulnerable for the first time. "The love I have for you does not diminish the love I had for her. It honors it. It proves that the heart can live again." In that moment, she understood his vow. He was offering her a love that had been tested by death and had chosen to live. She reached out and took his hand. In the flickering firelight, surrounded by an immense wilderness, they were the only two people in the world. And their world was about to be shattered again. Weeks later, they were making their way through a narrow pass when Kale suddenly froze. He held up a hand for silence. He pointed to the ground. A fresh track. A shod horse, bearing a heavy rider. And beside it the stub of an expensive cigar, the kind Kane favored. "Bounty hunters," Kale breathed, his body instantly tense. "They are close." They scrambled for cover, hiding in a crevice between two massive boulders. Soon, two riders came into view. Rough, hard-faced men. One of them dismounted. "Tracks are fresh," he called to his partner. "Unshod pony and smaller prints, a woman's boot. It's them. $500, cold hard cash. The boss wants the Apache alive, if possible. Says he has questions for him before he hangs him." Aura's blood ran cold. The men were blocking their path. To stay put meant being discovered. To retreat meant being trapped. And Kale's leg, from the strain of the climb, was stiff and aching. He couldn't outrun them. It was then that Aura saw it. A small ledge, 50 feet above them. A cluster of loose rocks and scree, balanced precariously. An idea, born of desperation and her newfound knowledge of the land, sparked in her mind. She looked at Kale, her eyes communicating her plan. He saw the resolve in her face and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. While he created a small diversion, tossing a pebble down the canyon, Ara began to climb. Her fingers found holds in the rock face, her boots scrambling for purchase. It was a terrifying ascent. Below, she could hear the bounty hunters moving toward the sound Kale had made. She reached the ledge, her heart hammering. She took her father's heavy Colt from her belt. She didn't aim at the men. She aimed at the small keystone rock that held the pile of scree in place. She took a deep breath, steadied her hand as Kale had taught her, and fired. The shot echoed like a thunderclap. The bullet struck the rock, and the unstable ledge gave way. A river of rock and gravel cascaded down the cliff face, not on top of the men, but directly in their path, blocking the canyon with a massive, impassable slide. Their horses reared in terror. The men shouted in alarm, their view of the upper canyon completely obscured by a thick cloud of dust. It had worked. They had bought themselves time. Scrambling down, she rejoined Kale, and together they fled, leaving the cursing, trapped men behind. They ran until they could run no more. That night, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, they reached the high, cold sanctuary of the Chiricahua Mountains, Kale's ancestral home. The immediate danger had passed, but the near miss had cemented their bond. She had not been the one rescued. She had been the rescuer. They were truly partners. But even in the safety of the high mountains, the shadow of Bartholomew Kane was long. One night, huddled for warmth in a snow-covered cave, Ara woke from a nightmare. Kane's cold, smiling face, vivid and terrifying. "He will never stop looking for us," she said, her voice trembling in the darkness. "I know," Kale replied. He was awake beside her, a silent guardian. "But he is looking for the woman you were, and the man I was. They no longer exist." He reached out and gently unfastened the heavy silver locket from her neck. It had remained there through their entire ordeal, a forgotten relic of her past life. It felt cold and dead in his palm. He crawled to the mouth of the cave. The world outside was a pristine blanket of white under a full moon. With a powerful flick of his wrist, he sent the locket sailing out into the darkness. It disappeared into a deep snowdrift without a sound, swallowed by the wilderness. He returned to her side, taking her in his arms. "My love was born of a world that was taken from me," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Yours was never allowed to be born at all. Together, we make a new world, Ara. Here, just us." He was right. Their love wasn't something he had given her. It was something they had built together, day by day, breath by breath, in the heart of the wild. They were fugitives. They were outcasts. Their future was a long, uncertain road. But they were free. And for the first time in her life, as she looked out at the vast, untamed wilderness, Ara Vance was not afraid. She was home. And so their story doesn't end with a ride into the sunset, but with a walk into the dawn of a new, uncertain day. Theirs is a reminder that true love is rarely about grand declarations or easy promises. It's forged in the fires of adversity. It's about finding that one person who sees you when the rest of the world looks right through you, and choosing to face the wilderness, both outside and within, together. They were two broken souls from different worlds who found that what they had left was more than enough to build a new one. Their journey was far from over, and the shadow of men like Bartholomew Kane is long, but they had each other. And in the heart of the unforgiving West, that was everything. If their story of courage and sacrifice touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story about the enduring power of the human spirit. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the dusty trails of history. What do you think happened to them next? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.